And this afternoon I'm delighted to welcome Nathalie Cohen, who is one of our fellows. Nathalie is a community archaeologist at MOLA, which is the Museum of London Archaeology Service. She works as the Thames Discovery Programme, on the Thames Discovery Programme there, and she also works for National Trust as the Regional Archaeologist for Kent and Sussex. As if that isn't enough, she's also an Honorary Research Associate at UCL, and she's also the Cathedral Archaeologist for Southwark Cathedral. And she's worked on a number of projects over the last 15 years. Clearly somebody with lots of energy and enthusiasm. And what she's going to be talking about this afternoon is the title is Tales from the Thames, Community Archaeology on London's River. So without further ado, I will hand over to Nathalie.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, I apologise in advance. I am slightly coldy today, so I will try and be as enthusiastic as I've just been talked up to be. I'll do my best. So I'm here today to talk to you about the Thames Discovery Programme, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background to our project, so why we're doing what we're doing and how the project has come about. Talk to you a little bit about some of our key sites and the things that we do with our volunteers, and hopefully answer any questions that you might have at the end. So it could be said that investigation or sort of a curiosity about the River Thames and its archaeology starts as far back as the 17th century. And we have this record from Samuel Pepys's diary of his visit to an excavation of some docks in Blackwall. And what he seems to be recording here is something that we've seen in a number of locations up and down the River Thames. The remains of a submerged landscape or a prehistoric forest. So you can see in the image there, this is a picture from Erith, so going out into the estuary, where we have a very large extent exposed of a prehistoric landscape at low tide, and you can see the trees next to Dr. Sophie Seal, who researched the site as part of her PhD. Now, John Cotton, formerly of the Museum of London, has referred to the Victorian period as the golden age of the Thames collector, the golden age of the antiquarian. This is a period when there was a huge amount of infrastructure being built in the City of London and across the Greater London area. So you have railways going in, new bridges being erected, sewage being installed. And what this means is that there is a huge amount of archaeological artefacts being retrieved by workmen and acquired by collectors. What this has turned out to mean is that a very large part of the assemblages in places like the British Museum, the Museum of London, and even in this very building here, I've just noticed upstairs, there are collections of Thames material. So these are artefacts that have been recovered from the river, and you can see some examples on the screen in front of us now. To the left-hand side, you have a group of Viking period artefacts recovered from the London Bridge area, and on the right-hand side gives you an idea of the different types of material and also the range of date of the material that's coming from the river. So in addition to artefacts associated with fishing, we also have a huge range of military equipment, shields and spears and swords and so on. And just to remind ourselves that we're working in a waterlogged environment, we also have very occasional finds which are organic, so wooden artefacts, which you can see just at the bottom here. This is the Dagenham idol that was found, unsurprisingly, in Dagenham in the 1930s, and is an artefact made of Scots pine. So it's a waterlogged environment that we're working in, which means the preservation of organic material is very good. And this is for those of you who haven't been to visit, and I do recommend a visit if you haven't been there. This is the blue Thames wall at the Museum of London in the Prehistoric Gallery. And you can see there just a few of the artefacts that have been recovered from the river. And again, you'll notice that there is a concentration of military equipment, and also you can see some human skulls down one side there, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. Obviously, as we're working in a riverine environment, nautical remains are a relatively common find. And this picture here shows an excavation in the early 1900s of a Roman boat from just near what's now the London Aquarium by the London Museum, in a very fine selection of hatware you can see there. So we've got this gradually growing body of data. We have antiquarian observations and collections. We have people starting to actually lift and record material from the river. As we move into the 20th century, we start seeing professional archaeologists becoming involved in the archaeology of the foreshore itself. None other than Sir Mortimer Wheeler. I'm going to go restart later. Was involved in some excavations on the foreshore in West London, near Brentford. Now, he excavated the remains of what he interpreted as a hut floor, which you can see on the right. This has been an interesting sort of question for us as to whether this is indeed a hut floor. And if it is a hut floor, you wouldn't normally build a hut in a waterlogged area that gets flooded. So it's more likely, probably, that it's some kind of wattle hurdle, so maybe the remains of an intertidal structure or a riverine structure like a fish trap. This is Ivanhoe Hume. He was responsible, for those of you who haven't heard of him, for rescue excavations across the bombed city of London after World War II, and the man is a bit of a personal hero of mine. He was not an archaeologist by training. He was, in his very own words, a failed playwright, but he ended up being responsible for a huge amount of work that was undertaken in the city after the war, alongside the work of the Roman and Medieval London Excavation Committee Council. In amongst all of this work, he also found time to look on the foreshore and to undertake his own foreshore explorations. And this is a quote from his book, The Treasure from the Thames. He was one of the first people really to articulate this idea that we need lots of eyes on the river, we need lots of people down there looking at what's going on the foreshore. This is his plan. It's what we would now call an alpha survey. It's like a field walking plot of the River Thames foreshore between Cannon Street Railway Bridge and London Bridge from 1949, complete with dragons and pirate ships. I always like to see those on a site plan. Now, what you can see is that he's added a whole series of crosses and descriptions to his plan here, including the wonderfully named River of Moving Mud, which comes out just at St Mary Overy's Dock. What this gives us is a snapshot of what the Thames foreshore looked like in this area in 1949, and an indication of the kinds of artefacts that he was seeing then. So he was seeing things like a Roman pavement, Roman and medieval pottery, coins, tokens, jetons, and so on. So it gives us a very valuable insight into what this part of the river looked like all those years ago. Now, the work of the avocational or volunteer archaeologists has always been an incredibly important part of the intertidal archaeological sort of profession, essentially. This slide here shows members of the Wandsworth Historical Societies surveying their foreshore just near Putney Railway Bridge, you can see in the back there, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and they have continued to work on that same area of foreshore right up until today. So what that means is, in West London, we have an archive of over 40 years of work on this piece of foreshore, so we have a very good understanding through the hard work of this local archaeological society, all undertaken by volunteers, of how the foreshore has grown and changed and eroded in this area of London. Another theme we will be revisiting. Now, moving into the City of London and the development of professional archaeology during the 1970s and 80s. This image here shows excavations on the site of Trig Lane in the early 1970s. And I would draw your attention to the lack of any PPE, personal protective equipment, and it would appear that shirts were not required. I don't know what you did if you were a lady, maybe a bikini top. Essentially, numerous excavations, which continue right up until the present day, along the city waterfront and along the South Bank, have given archaeologists an enormous data set of information about the development of the city waterfront and the ways in which, from the Roman period onwards, the shape of the river has changed. So the River Thames today is a much narrower a much faster flowing river than it was in the past with a greater tidal range. Part of the reason for that is the fact that it has been consistently embanked and essentially canalised from the Roman period onwards. And this image here from Trig Lane is a classic example of that development. So it shows this gradual embankment out into the river with a series of timber and later stone revetments growing out into the river. But it wasn't really until the early 1990s that anyone started to look at the foreshore itself with any more sort of organised thought, shall we say. There have been lots and lots of people down there, as I've said, looking, but it was really in the early 1990s that all of these different strands of information started to be pulled together. And it was the work of a gentleman called Richard Hill, who was doing his dissertation at University College London in the early 1990s, that really sort of kick-started the whole process. So he was looking at this site here at Bermondsey, and what he realised was he was looking at surviving stratigraphy. So there was maybe a perception before then that there was no stratigraphy surviving on the foreshore, that what we were looking at was just material that was washing around and things that were constantly mobile, and that we weren't looking at an archaeological site as we would understand it, so something where layers of archaeology have survived. Richard's work at Bermondsey demonstrated that this was not the case, and it was his work with UCL and also the work undertaken by Gustav Milne and John Cotton at Vauxhall in 1993 that sort of helped to bring everyone's thoughts together. So here we're looking at an image of a series of timber piles running out into the river at Vauxhall. And these were found in association with two Bronze Age spearheads which had been deliberately rammed into the foreshore. So these are not artefacts that were floating around, they were in situ. The piles themselves were also dated to the Bronze Age. So this is a surviving Bronze Age structure on the foreshore. So in 1995, and the project ran until 1999, Gustav Milne, who's here in the audience today, so if you have any questions you must quiz him, he's just up at the back there, of University College London, and Nick Merriman from the Museum of London inaugurated the Thames Archaeological Survey. Now this was a project that was very ambitious in scope. The idea was, with three professional members of staff, Mike Webber, who led the project, John Binns and myself, the idea was to try and map the foreshore of Greater London. So quite a big ask for a 3-year project. So of course this project also had a very large component of volunteer support. It was a community archaeology project in its first inception. The idea was to try and put some more, essentially to put some more dots on the map of the Greater London then Sites and Monuments record. So to add to the picture that we already had, that I've referred to earlier, of all these collected materials and so on, and the archaeological excavations that had taken place along the waterfront. So during the Thames Archaeological Survey, we did record a huge number of features. So everything from prehistoric submerged landscapes, as I mentioned earlier, prehistoric artefacts. So this image that you can see here in the middle is a Neolithic wooden club that was found on the foreshore at Chelsea. It's a bit like a cricket bat shape with a sort of baseball handle. People have called it a fish beater, but we don't really know what they were beating with it, to be honest. Lots and lots of nautical timbers. So you can see here the remains of a vessel eroding out on the foreshore, where it's been hulked on the foreshore at Erith, and two very large ship's rudders dating from the 18th century, recorded by the City of London Archaeological Society at Shadwell, and an Anglo-Saxon structure, one of a number of Anglo-Saxon fish traps recorded on the foreshore. This is at Chelsea. There were also some lovely artefacts discovered during this period of time, including this. This is a tiny Roman intaglio found on the foreshore in the area where Ivanhoe Hume drew his wonderful map. So it's an image you'll become quite familiar with as we go along. Now, this is our site. the foreshore was divided up into a series of borough and then site areas. So each borough has a series with a riverine edge, has a series of zones, and then within those zones, the records numbers that you can see down the right-hand side of the column represents how many features we observed in those areas. Now, I should add that we recorded absolutely everything, including the shopping trolleys. So the shopping trolleys were later taken out by the Great Atlantic Sites and Monuments Record, but you know, I thought they were kind of interesting. They still are. I won't go on about shopping trolleys. You might notice that we do have a gap in Newham and Barking and Dagenham, where we've had some problems with accessing the foreshore, but we do hope to remedy that this year, in fact. So, the project ended, the Thames Archaeological Survey ended in 1999, but certainly people's interest in the foreshore did not stop there. Now, in 2001, Time Team visited the foreshore at Vauxhall, so the site we were looking at earlier with the Bronze Age bridge, and they demonstrated that it takes, I've never counted how many people there are in this picture, but there are a lot, that many people to dig a very, very small hole, which is just here. Essentially what they were doing was excavating one of the timber posts to see whether it was indeed a post which had been dug into a hole, you know, dig a post hole, put the post in, backfill it, or a pile, suggesting it had been driven in a more sort of waterlogged environment. And you can still catch the programme and their various deliberations on YouTube. Other projects were also running and continue to run. Camden Young Archaeologists ran a whole series of workshops for teenagers. The City of London Archaeological Society began and still are heavily involved with the Open Foreshore Weekend at the Tower of London. Thames Explorer Trust continue to develop their educational outreach on the foreshore, and Thames 21 who are an environmental charity. If you've not come across them, they do clean-ups on the River Thames. So a very interesting organisation, because of course one man's rubbish is another man's archaeology. So I'm personally, again, fascinated by the presence of the Hoover on the foreshore and what is it doing. Professional archaeologists were also increasingly involved on the foreshore as a result of development work. So new bridges, pontoons, jetties, and so on were all sort of subject to, or became subject to, the same kinds of examination as you would have on a normal dryland site. So here you can see members of staff from Museum of London Archaeology recording in Deptford Creek and on the foreshore where the Millennium Bridge now is, and at Hungerford Bridge. Which brings us to the Thames Discovery Programme. Now, we were the lucky recipients of a Heritage Lottery funded grant in 2008, and we were hosted at the time, managed at the time, by the Thames Estuary Partnership, a part of UCL, and by the Thames Explorer Trust, with a series of partners you can see down the side there. Now, in 2011, our Heritage Lottery funding goes away, ran out, and we became part of Museum of London Archaeology, which is where we currently are based today. So what do? We do public events, we do guided walks, we do sort of educational events for children and for adults, and we are involved in things like the Tower of London Open Foreshore Weekend that I mentioned earlier. We run a series of public lectures, so once every couple of months we have people to come along and speak to our volunteers or anyone who would like to come along and learn more about aspects of Thames archaeology. And for our volunteer group, the Foreshore Recording and Observation Group, we also run workshops to help develop people's skills in things like artefact identification, animal bone, field recording, and so on. Now, most importantly, we have to bear in mind all the time that we're working in an intertidal environment. So a very important part of our work, and a very big part of our work every spring, is the training programme for the Foreshore Recording and Observation Group, or FROG. Now, there is a very sound reasons behind all of this, because we do not want this to happen. Now, these two gentlemen are not members of our group. They had been to the pub one lovely sunny evening and decided that a foreshore walk was just the ticket. Unfortunately, they weren't aware of the possible hazards of walking on the foreshore. This is actually at Chelsea, so very close to where the fish trap is that we were looking at earlier. If you walk just beyond it, the foreshore, well, disappears, as you can see in that image there. So a big part of working with our volunteers, and why we ask everyone to come and do the training with us, is to make everyone aware of the fact that we are working in this very dynamic, very changeable intertidal environment. We need to be aware of that. Once we've sort of scared everyone's senses with the health and safety aspects of the project, we then take them out, the volunteers out onto site and train them in archaeological recording techniques. So here you can see some of our volunteers at work in sites all the way across Greater London. So we work everywhere from Richmond right the way down to the Thames barrier. So these are some images from the foreshore at the House of Parliament, at the top left, at Strand on the Green in West London, the bottom left, and at Putney on the right-hand side. And at Putney we were recording the foundations of the 1722 bridge, which you can see exposed on the foreshore if you go down. So here are a few facts and figures. We now have over 450 members of the Frog. We've recorded over 1,000 archaeological features on the foreshore, not including shopping trolleys, because I'm not allowed to include them anymore. We've arranged and organised over 250 events, including an annual conference every year. We have won 2 British Archaeological Awards, including the 2012 award for the Best Community Project, and we've had over 500,000 views, page views of our website, which is really the hub for where we put all of our information. So we try and disseminate as much information as we can online. Which brings me to the subject of digital outreach. Now, we do use the internet an awful lot as a way of communicating what we are doing out on site. Now, part of that is to make sure that the voices that the public or readers of the website are hearing are not just our voices. They're not just the voices of the team, of the staff members. They are also the voices of our volunteers. We have 2 sections of our website where we have a very large amount of publicly generated content. So on the Frog blog and in the Riverpedia section, which is the research section of our website, around 30% of the content of those pages is derived from members of the public who've submitted articles, members of our volunteer group who've written about something that they've done or they've been interested in. And it means that we have a really amazing sort of spread of information on our website, something that I'm hugely proud of. So I do encourage you, if you haven't looked at the Thames Discovery Programme website, if you have access to the internet, please do have a look. And if you have an article within you, then please let me know, because we're always on the lookout for more Thames articles. We do also use social media very widely. So we put all of the photographs that we take on site on Flickr, which is a sort of photographic hosting website, so you can see where we've been over the last 5 years. There's around 3,000 photographs on there now, so if you want to know where I or Courtney or Elliot or Gustav have been over the last 5 years, you can look us up on the internet. And we do increasingly use Facebook and Twitter as well as a way of communicating to people. Now sometimes, especially with Twitter, we're just using it for kind of silly things and things that make us laugh. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we are also trying to use it for slightly more serious purposes as well. It is amazing the information that you find on Twitter and the kinds of information that people put up there. So Nicola White is a mudlarker and an artist. She uses material from the river to create recycled art, and she posted a picture last year of some human bones that she found while walking on the foreshore in Greenwich. And the first we heard about them was through Twitter, closely followed by a phone call from herself and her partner. And the way we kept in touch with this story was via Twitter. So we ended up tweeting the police saying, you know, how's it going? Have you found out any more about them? And that was also how they replied, which was via Twitter. So they did eventually send back the information that they'd had the bones radiocarbon dated, and that they were actually not just from one person but from 2, with some slightly confusing dates, I have to say, and they did follow up with a report later on. So Twitter can be extremely useful. I'm not trying to convert you all if you don't use Twitter, I'm just saying it's very handy. We've also used it to do a little tiny bit of politicking. We were tweeting Boris Johnson from our work account, and he was ignoring us, I think is the best way of putting it. We were asking him a specific question in his Ask Boris session that he holds once a month. The question was, has the impact of increased river services on the fragile archaeology of the Thames foreshore been considered? Essentially, after about 6 months of asking, we mobbed him a little bit. And not only the Thames Discovery account, but a whole series of other accounts also asked him the same question. And he eventually replied to Sunny's question. She's one of our volunteers, which was the same question. And the answer was, we always take account of archaeology, but river traffic very low by historical comparisons. So essentially, it's a factual answer. There is less river traffic. It's obviously a very different kind of river traffic. And we are certainly noticing the impact of some of that river traffic on the foreshore. In particular, these. Now, here you can see, this is Gustav. He's taking on the clipper. He will not be beaten. We have noticed, and this is anecdotal, but it is borne out by the data that we've been gathering, that there is a correlation between archaeology and other deposits on the foreshore eroding more quickly near to Thames Clipper ferry piers than in other places. But the Port of London Authority would rather us use the words movement of sediment rather than erosion. So the sediment is indeed moving. Now, the Thames Clippers, as you can see from this image, do create quite a large wash. So here is the boat, just here, and this is its track running down the river. This picture is from Google Earth. As you zoom in, you can see just how clearly this is having an impact as it swings round the bend. We're looking at Greenwich here. And as it comes in closer to the river, you can see the wash that's actually being created. And this is a wave of a reasonably substantial size if you're standing right next to it. Greenwich is a site that we've been looking at since the 1990s, and we were aware in the 90s of some very significant archaeology on that site, so much so that that's what we thought then. We were recording during the 1990s with University College London the remains of a Tudor jetty on the foreshore. And when we went back in 2009, we had Gustav's plan in hand. This is published in the London Archaeologist. We were looking for, you can see this feature here, and also to see whether these other features around the site had survived. What we found was that the Tudor jetty is indeed still in place. We also noticed that the timber piles at the top of the foreshore, which possibly relate to revetting or embanking the river wall there, also still survive. But what we did notice in May 2009 was a whole series of features that we'd never seen before. So the timber piles you can see at the bottom of the foreshore there, and this small group of timbers that sort of appeared and disappeared over a year or so. So much so that we eventually had to sort of put them on a map and then do a big kind of X marks the spot to find them again. So this is the lower group of timbers in February 2010. You can see Elliot, my colleague, our field officer, and Gustav there, providing the human scales here. And again in February 2010 we're looking for this other group of timbers in front of the Charles II building. That's what they looked like then, so sort of gradually appearing. In May 2010 they sort of disappeared, to be honest, but there was another group of timbers that appeared in roughly the same area, so we asked Mola's geomatics team to come and survey those in for us. And then in August 2010 we put some big rocks around it to mark where it was when we found it again, so we wouldn't lose it again. So on the 14th of August it looked like that. You can see Bridget from UCL there. And on the 15th of August, after a little bit of aggressive cleaning, as we call it, we exposed the remains of a U-shaped timber jetty, so the base plates of a large jetty. You can see Marion, Helen and Chris working away at that. Now, this is a structure that has continued to puzzle and tantalise us, and we're literally fresh, I say fresh, box fresh from site. We were only there a couple of weeks ago, so we have quite a lot of news to tell about it. We originally thought that the U-shaped timber jetty and the timbers you can see behind were two separate structures, but gradually as the erosion on the site increased, it became clear that they were actually all part of the same structure. So the U-shaped timbers are in sort of this area here, with the lower timbers there, and there's another line of timbers eroding out at the top there in March 2011. Here are the Frog reenacting a jetty in May 2011. By April 2012, we started marking it out with buckets, so you can see the size and extent, and with the people there for human scales, you can see it's quite a large structure, over 40 metres long and extending out into the river. And by February 2014, it looked like this. So it has continued to erode at quite a rapid rate, and you'll notice that all of these timber piles are now sticking up out of the foreshore much more than they were, and the base plate timbers are largely disappearing. Now, looking at the way in which it was constructed and some of the techniques that had been used on this jetty, we were originally interpreting it as quite an early medieval structure, so something that may be dated to as early as the 12th or 13th century, which led us down the line of researching what was going on in Greenwich during the 12th or 13th century. And at that time, the manor was owned by an alien abbey, by foreign abbey, the Abbey of St. Peter at Ghent, which was a very rich and powerful monastery, which would have been doing a lot of importing and exporting and bringing material to and from. So we were, I must admit, quite happy with that as a working theory. However, all of that changed literally last week, the week before last. Damien Goodberg, who's Mola's timber specialist, came down to visit us on site, and his thoughts were that because of the amount of elm that has been used in the construction of this jetty, and also the fact that while some of the woodworking techniques look quite archaic, they look quite old, some of the others that are obvious on the lower timbers, where you can see evidence of possible pit sawing, suggest that this isn't a 12th or 13th century structure after all, sadly, but it is, excitingly, probably a 16th century structure, which means that we can now start thinking about saying things like, well, Henry VIII might have walked on this structure. So it's still an extremely good story indeed, and here is Damien being Henry VIII and walking on this structure. This is the sort of working plan of the site at the moment, and if you just cast your mind back to the plan that we had from the 1990s and compare it with what we're looking at now, you'll see that the amount of change that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years on this site is really extraordinary. And there is indeed a good deal of movement of sediment going on this site. We've also recorded the remains of what we think is the earlier river wall alignment here. So this is part of the probably Tudor river wall, which you can see runs at a slightly different alignment to the present river wall. So you just see it just in there. There's also probably a very large sluice or jetty eroding out here. Now, foreshore archaeology is somewhat of a movable feast. So when we first saw that structure, it was the edge of a revetment, then it became a causeway, and as it's eroded out further, it's turned into a sluice. So, just coming back to our sort of site area, what we are very concerned with, and one of our major research aims, is erosion and the monitoring of the erosion on the foreshore. So trying to understand whether all of the features that we've recorded, so the dots on the map essentially, are they still there? If you go back and revisit the site, can you relocate them? Have they moved? Have they changed? Or are there new things there? So just a few examples from some of our key sites. One of our sites is at Vauxhall. Now, we've already mentioned the Bronze Age bridge at Vauxhall, which is just on the other side of Vauxhall Bridge. We noticed, again in around 2009, further timbers eroding out of the foreshore in front of the MI6 building, which is always an entertaining place to work. These timbers turned out to be very, very early indeed. They are late Mesolithic in date, and they are eroding out of the foreshore in association with a huge amount of archaeological material. So stratified archaeological layers, including some very rare, rare for the foreshore, early Neolithic pottery, lithics, animal bone, and so on. So this is, again, a part of a prehistoric landscape on the foreshore, which is eroding out in front of our eyes. It is, frankly, the best thing to have come out of the water associated with MI6. We've also been working on the foreshore at the House of Parliament at the invitation of the Parliamentary Estates Directorate. They were very interested in this very large collection of worked stone that was visible on the foreshore in the area just near Victoria Tower Gardens. Now, the work on this sort of assemblage is still in progress, but it appears that there is a considerable amount of medieval material as well as later material mixed in, and this is one of the sites where we have, we don't normally get these kind of concentrations of worked stone on a site. There are some 50, 60 pieces of rather nice masonry on the foreshore, so got us thinking as to where it could have come from. Now, one explanation that we've come up with relates to activity during World War II. This is Gustav's particular area of interest. He's been looking at the work of the Thames Flood Unit, who were responsible for patching holes in London's Riverside Wall when it was bombed. And it was actually hit over 100 times during World War II, and London never flooded, which suggests that the work of the Thames Flood Unit is a rather unsung and extremely effective use of a group of people. So what they did was every time there was a breach in the river wall, they would go along and fill it with concrete. And here you can see a photograph from their archive from Victoria Tower Gardens taken in 1941. This is the same area today, and you can see, Gus, just at the bottom of the breach there, you can see it's been worked to make it look all the same, but it is a very visible scar. Now, an awful lot of that worked stone seems to relate to the scar, so we think it may have been part of the backfilling when they created Victoria Tower Gardens. There were a number of surviving medieval buildings in the Westminster area at the time, which were pulled down, and potentially they were using that sort of rubble and hardcore as backfill. When the bomb hit, it's just exploded out onto the foreshore. Another sort of evidence of bomb damage here, the Frog, bless them, reenact a bomb strike. They've reenacted a jetty once already this lecture, now they are reenacting a bomb strike. This is the site at Burrell's Wharf on the Isle of Dogs, which is the site of Brunel's launch of the Great Eastern. So you can see the concrete platform, one of the concrete platforms that the ship was resting on. And it looks, we believe, there's a bomb strike right the way through it in this case. And just to give you an indication of the size and scale of Brunel's project, here is a picture of the ship itself on the foreshore. I'm not going to talk too much about ships today because those are Elliot's speciality. You'll have to invite him back to talk about ships in detail. One of the things that I was most interested in on the Isle of Dogs site was not actually the Great Eastern launch site, but was this. Now, this was again discovered by a mudlarker, so a metal detectorist who's licensed by the Port of London Authority to record and collect artefacts from the Thames foreshore. This is Nick Stevens' photograph. Now, he was walking along the foreshore on the Isle of Dogs with his dog when he came across this. Now, he rang the police and said, "I found a human skull," and they said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yes, very." And eventually they came, and the tide was coming in at that time, so the decision was made to remove the skull then and there. And we subsequently met Nick and heard about the skull, and we were able to arrange for it to be radiocarbon dated. And the date that was returned was quite late, a post-medieval date, which was something of a surprise maybe, given that an awful lot of the material, human remains that have come out from the river, are either prehistoric, largely prehistoric in date, or sometimes Anglo-Saxon. Now, the police apparently went back and had a look, couldn't find any more of this body, and basically drew a line, move along please. However, the fact that this is a skull with an articulated jaw suggested that the rest of the body should be there. So we actually went back during a very cold winter and had another look. I don't want to diss the police's excavation techniques, but they kind of missed most of the skeleton. So this was a tricky excavation job, right at the low tide level, with the Thames clippers going past, creating a wash about every 10 minutes. But in spite of the sort of challenging circumstances, we managed to recover really the entirety of the skeleton, with the exception of a few toe bones. What we know about this skeleton is that it was deliberately buried on the foreshore. It was in a cut, so this is someone who had been interred on the foreshore. It's a child. It's too young to sex definitively. We don't know how they died, because there's no marks on the bones to tell us so, but it's possible that it's very likely in fact that they were malnourished, and they certainly were clothed, because we found some buttons with the body. So we don't know why this child is there. It's possible that they drowned and they were just buried in the nearest place that someone could find. The Isle of Dogs during this period is quite a lonely and unoccupied place. The site that's marked on Roke's map there of the mid-1700s as Chapel House is not a chapel during this period, it is a house. So whether this child was murdered and someone left them on the foreshore, we don't know. The other possibility is that you might notice just on the tip of the Isle of Dogs there is a gallows. And they did hang children during this period, so it is possible that we're looking at punishment of some sort. And you can see the gallows again, probably just there in this Hogarth image. And this is an apprentice the gallows being pointed out to him. This is a reminder. Once we started sort of thinking a little bit more though about post-medieval burial, these are unusual burials, and during this period of time you would expect everyone really to be buried within churchyards. But once you start looking for them, there are other examples of post-medieval foreshore burials, including this one from Bermondsey, so slightly earlier in the 15th century. This is one from actually from the MI6 building, so you can see they rather unexpectedly hit the remains of someone's legs, so in an area that would have been foreshore but is no longer. This one is from the Greenwich Peninsula, excavated by Moeller, and another young individual who was again clothed and wearing buttons very similar to our child from the Isle of Dogs. So when you start putting them on a map with whizzy little labels, it looks like this. So that there certainly is potential further research to be done on this idea of post-medieval foreshore burial. The Tower of London is another one of our key sites. We've been working here for nearly 5 years, mainly focusing on the area towards the eastern end of the site, so next to Tower Bridge. This image is from Tower Bridge itself. We've been working with the Mudlarks here to undertake a find survey. So generally we don't focus on artefacts. The focus of our project is on structures, but at the Tower of London we were interested to see whether we could look at any distribution patterns from the artefacts that were coming out. And there is a huge range of material coming out from the site, including Roman coins, you can see on the left, medieval pilgrim tokens, quite early medieval ceramics there, and a 12th century bone buckle are just a few of the finds that have been recorded. This is another find recorded in 2010, a stone cannonball, and if you look, you can see on this 18th century drawing of London, I like to think that it's one of those cannonballs. Again, coming back to our theme of erosion, this is something that has really been marked on this site. Now, in the 1990s, again, we surveyed this site. We have almost no photos of the area simply because there were no features to record. However, by 2010, you can see we have a forest of timber piles, and if you just keep an eye on the pile there, as we go through the years 2011, the foreshore level is dropping. Here it is again. Basically, the foreshore is eroding to such an extent that the Tower of London has had to take some quite drastic emergency measures. Now the reason for that is that you can see along the top of the foreshore here, these are the foundations of the medieval river wall. We should not be able to see the foundations of the medieval river wall. This is a bad thing. This is what the area looked like. This is the camp shed for the construction of the Tower Bridge. This is 1990s, and this is last year. So you can see that the foreshore in this area has dropped well over a metre, and consequently a huge amount of not only archaeological material, but also material that actually stabilises and holds the foreshore together has gone. This is the foundations of the wall. You can see some evidence for a possible construction cut at the bottom there. And by last year, the wall itself was actually cracking, hence the urgency for repair. So Elliot and Courtney this year have been monitoring those repair works, which are quite drastic. They are placing sort of bags of concrete pebbles on the foreshore to basically consolidate the surface and hope that it holds the wall up, essentially. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as it goes along. Along the theme of erosion, we have now just received a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund. Museum of London Archaeology has received a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund to extend this model of monitoring and recording erosion with volunteer support to a nationwide project, so across England. This is very much following on in the footsteps of work that is already being done in Scotland as part of the SCAPE project, Coastwatch, Shore Watch, as was known. This is the Citizen project, the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeological Network. This is a whole other lecture in itself, but I do hope that as the project progresses that you will hear more about it from my colleagues who are currently working on the round 2 application. The project is very much in development. But the idea is, both with the Thames Discovery Programme and with the Citizen project, to get people out onto the foreshore and onto the coast to monitor and record this very fragile archaeology that is washing away before our very eyes. And I'd leave it there.
Around our building, we have things which were found on the Thames, and if it hadn't been for those early antiquarians going around rummaging and picking these things up and thinking, oh, there's something of interest here, we wouldn't have them now. So we do have some pilgrim badges, Thomas and Becket pilgrim badges, and interestingly we also have 1 or 2 brasses, church brasses, which were found in the River Thames as well. Nobody knows why. It is interesting. So anyway, Floor, would anybody like to ask some questions of Nathalie?
Your kind of changed sort of dates for the actual city of London, which is always said to be there was nothing before the Romans came, or is that still the same?
No, I mean from the work at Vauxhall, we can certainly say that there was activity going on in the Vauxhall area from the Mesolithic period onwards. Our work hasn't necessarily changed the interpretation of anything that's going on in the city of London, because it's very, very rare to find any prehistoric material within the city of London. On the South Bank, we have recorded, and Museum of London Archaeology has recorded evidence for prehistoric peat deposits, so we can track quite accurately along with the waterfront excavations the sort of outline of the prehistoric landscape, but we haven't found anything prehistoric in the city itself. But if you have specific questions about prehistory, I would refer you to my colleague Courtney, who is the prehistorian of our gang. So we each have certain areas that we focus on, and Courtney's here. She's hiding, definitely. She's just at the back, so if you have questions about prehistory, do please ask.
You're saying about the erosion on the north bank of the Thames. Is that
localised environments, so new bridges have an effect, for example, new piers have an effect, and so on. There are certainly areas where deposition is occurring, as well as erosion occurring. So I mean, the Port of London Authority are indeed correct, it is movement of sediment, but the erosive regime is certainly quite severe in places.
So is there any particular place where this sediment is dumping, given you told us about the Thames Clip where you showed us pictures? So is there a favourite place this sediment
for material that's washed up? There are a couple of places where I can think of, just near, for example, near Alderman's Stairs, so just near St Catherine's Dock. There's a considerable build-up in one of the corners there, so again a very kind of localised sort of regime, so much so that you can almost hop over the river wall and step onto surface because it's just building up in the corner there. But it to be honest, doesn't tend to be the main focus of our work, those areas, because that's largely redeposited material, so we're usually looking at the other end. They are, however, usually full of material artefacts that are washing around.
Something for that there.
Query regarding the part of the river which does not dry out at low tide, i.e. the central portion.
Yeah.
Has any work been carried out within there, such as monitoring of dredging, sonar survey, that sort of thing?
Yes, there's several parts to this answer. The Port of London Authority does undertake sonar surveys, so they do hold a considerable amount of data about the bed of the river and what that looks like. There is also dredging, which is monitored, and Elliot indeed has monitored some dredging operations further out into the channel. What there isn't so much of, any of, up in our sort of area of the river is diving, simply because the conditions are, as I understand it from those who dive, are not conducive, and it would be very difficult to see anything apart from anything else. So there is work of that nature, but it generally tends to take place a little bit further downstream from where we are. Although obviously the Thames Tideway Tunnel, the new super sewer that will be going in after consultation in a few years' time, they've done a lot of work at looking at the sort of lower area, the lower parts of the river, the bits that remain wet.
Great. You said that the erosion is a problem.
Yes.
But also, wouldn't you say that it's helped you in some instances by actually revealing stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise known?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has a benefit because we are seeing things that we've never seen before. The con for that is that we only have a limited window in which to see them.
Okay.
So without our volunteer groups, who really are the eyes and ears on the ground, and without the Thames mudlarks, who are also out there looking all the time, it would be very, very easy to miss things because things appear and are there for a while and then they disappear again. But there's absolutely no doubt that the erosion is revealing new things to us all the time.
With all the finds that have been made, is there any danger, any areas becoming exhausted of finds?
Not as yet. No. And there are some areas where we have some evidence that things are bottoming out and we are at natural surfaces, and certainly the amount of finds that the metal detectorists were collecting at the Tower of London in the area we were working in decreased year on year, simply because those artefact bearing layers were washing out. But there's an awful lot of river out there, and I think there's lots and lots more discoveries still to come.
Good.
Ordnance, do you find lots of work to ordnance in the river?
Occasionally, yes, and we do have some guidance for our volunteers on what to do if you find ordnance, which is generally bring the police. And every so often we have found guns and things like that on the foreshore. So is a 4-day programme. We've actually just finished 2 sessions this year, but do get in touch with us, take our contact details and do drop us a line, because if there is enough demand for it, we will think about running another training session this year. If not, I'm afraid it will have to be next year. But in the interim, we are still running a whole series of public events, lectures and guided walks and so on that you'd be more than welcome